Welcome to the PowerPoint on the elderly and disadvantaged. This is Dr. Moyer narrating for my disadvantaged family class. So you probably have heard before the elderly make up 13% of the population now, but that this is expected to double in the next 25 years. So that means that 1 out of every 4 Americans will be elderly by the year 2035. That's quite a jump. And you can literally think of it as the 1 in 4 people you know will be elderly. One of the issues that has come up with the increase in elderly, primarily due to the baby boomer generation, but also due to improvements in technology and medication and sanitation and what we know about lifestyle changes and prescription medications and social support, etc. People are living longer and longer. And one of the concerns is how families are going to care for the elderly. It used to be that parents that were aging just moved in with their children, their adult children, and their family, or never left. Families just lived together, multiple generations under one roof. Now it's more likely that people place their parents into some type of long care facility or program, or even what we may call retirement housing, assisted living facilities, but it's becoming much more common and the demand is growing. How are the elderly disadvantaged? There's a number of different ways. We'll talk about all of them. The first one is economically. So 10% live at the poverty threshold or lower, but as always, we have to double that to include everybody that's living at the low income level, and that encompasses at least 2 out of 5 adults over the age of 65. Social Security has been the most successful social policy in the United States for reducing poverty. However, it is no longer just the primary source of how people will survive after retirement. People now have to provide for themselves, and Social Security is just a supplemental income. As far as mobility, over half of the elderly have a documented disability, primarily women, as we discussed with the Disabilities and Disadvantage PowerPoint, and almost half have some type of activity limitation. And so getting around and doing things that they've done before is not as common, and so it does limit what people can do. Also, abuse. There are a number of different types of abuse, and this is very similar to child abuse with the exception of the financial and material exploitation and self-neglect. Children are not able to necessarily self-neglect, but aging adults are, and that just means they're choosing not to, or they're not able to take care of themselves. And so this is something that is considered a form of abuse, and somebody has to intervene. If you click on the link for financial exploitation, I will place this PowerPoint. Not only is it going to be in YouTube form, but I'm also going to put it on D2L. And if you're watching it, you can click on the financial exploitation and watch a public service announcement that one of my graduate students made, giving an example of how the elderly can be exploited financially. And here are other definitions for the types of abuse. So what can we do about elder abuse? Similar to child abuse, this is a vulnerable population that we need to advocate for. So recognize the warning signs, and all of these links will be active on the PowerPoint, but they're not necessarily active here on the YouTube video. So you'll want to check these out. There's a help guide for elder abuse, some information. You want to listen and listen carefully. Many times the elderly will share information, but not just immediately off the bat. You have to listen to the stories they tell, have to listen to what they're saying very carefully, and you will oftentimes find that adults will give hints about what's going on, or they'll say something that'll make you question them and think more about what they just said. Report abuse, of course, when you suspect it. We're mandated by law to report it, just like with child abuse, and there's the hotline number. Spend as much time as possible with your loved one. If you do have a loved one in some sort of assisted living facility or a nursing home, make sure the staff knows that you're around often. And even making phone calls helps because it shows that somebody is paying attention and cares. Those individuals that have visitors are less likely to be abused than those that don't. Make friends with the staff. It definitely helps. Every little bit helps. Also, when it comes to dementia, the elderly are at a bigger disadvantage than those younger than the age of 65. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. About 50 to 80% of all dementia is Alzheimer's. It's not a natural part of aging, which is what people sometimes say. It's a misconception. But age is a risk factor, so the older one gets, the greater the risk. And there's no cure for Alzheimer's. It's fatal. Right now, 1 in 3 older adults has Alzheimer's. And if you click on this link that I've provided in the PowerPoint, you will find more information about that disease. Interestingly enough, here's another link for you. This video that focuses on validation therapy is really interesting. Naomi Field developed it and is featured in the video showing how it works. It's about 5 minutes long, but it's really worth watching. It was floating around Facebook for a while, which is how I came about it, because I watched it and thought, wow, this is amazing. So there's information about validation therapy, and you can also look up Naomi Field and find out more about it. It's not the traditional form of therapy that's been used, and not everyone's using it, but it's been very effective at reaching people. Also, isolation. So the elderly experience a lot of isolation. Their relocation, retirement, the loss of a spouse or a relative or a friend or even children, this can trigger isolation, and many people are affected by it. Doesn't necessarily refer to physical isolation, can also include emotional and social isolation. It's really more about what the older adult says or feels. If they feel isolated, they are isolated. So it doesn't just have to be somebody living in a rural area. And there are many negative outcomes associated with isolation, which is why we need to be concerned about it. Isolation's linked to higher blood pressure. It's linked to a greater risk of contracting infectious diseases. It's linked to anxiety, depression, lower financial security, arthritis, gastrointestinal problems, loss of impulse control, meaning like not eating healthy or abusing substances, and even the early onset of dementia. So the need for social connection, it's embedded within our nature. We're very social creatures, and our brains are actually wired with neurons to seek out social interaction. It's essential to our survival. When people experience isolation, particularly if they don't want to be isolated, then they are more likely to experience these negative outcomes. Some ways to combat it. Research shows that those that attend church services or other faith-related activities, participating in volunteer or community activities, these can lower the incidences of loneliness, as can phone calls with family and loved ones. And although text messaging and social media is another way to connect with the aging population, phone calls and face-to-face visits are preferred because of the risk and the negative outcomes associated with being isolated. When it comes to nutrition, it's not just the unavailability of food or not being able to afford it. It's also the ability to prepare and eat food. So many of the aging experience loss of appetite due to either health conditions or prescription medications they're taking, or isolation or depression. But if food is brought to them prepared and they can smell it, many times that can trigger their appetite, make them more likely to eat. That's why programs like Piecemeal that deliver hot meals to the elderly are very effective at helping with nutrition and food insecurity. It's not just enough to drop off canned goods. It's not even enough to drop off frozen food, because If somebody lacks the ability to prepare their food, whether it's due to lack of knowledge or even arthritis or other conditions that interfere with their ability to prepare food, then they're not going to eat. So not only is it the lack of food, but also other issues that affect nutrition that need to be considered. Independence, another issue. When we have this discussion in class, lots of times the students will talk about how they'll have a story about how a grandparent fought to keep their license or fought to live alone, and they express concern, they can't live alone, they can't drive, etc. And I always try to point out, how would you feel if somebody tried to interfere with your independence? That's very difficult to deal with, and people that are aging are already dealing with so many other different types of changes, including losing loved ones, isolation, health problems, loss of mobility, etc., that independence is something they fiercely hold on to. And before somebody does take away someone's ability to drive or get around, we need to consider ways that they can still maintain their independence. And that may be strategizing about using public transportation or family members certain days of the week providing rides so that the person can run their own errands, etc. When it comes to technology, a lot of the aging population can be frightened, confused, or even intimidated by technology. So society needs to be patient, and oftentimes with a little guidance and a little patience, aging adults can use different types of technology to connect with others, including their grandchildren. And you can't assume that all of the elderly are intimidated by technology, because that's just not true. Many are. It's the fastest growing population interacting with social media, and so it is something that's becoming more common. And then finally, treatment by society. Think about how there are so many sayings about, older people being bad drivers, or they can't hear, or they're grouchy and want to get their way, or they're incompetent, or oh, so cute and cuddly, and reduced to being compared to a child. This is detrimental to the aging population's health and mental health. And it's also detrimental to you, because the more you cut down on the elderly or the aging population, you have to remember you are also aging every second. And you will also someday be in that position, and you don't want society to treat you that way. So how we treat our aging population is very important. And once again, I remind you that FCS professionals are always modeling or expected to model the kind of behavior that we want to see in clients or other families, individuals, communities. So think about what you say before you say it, and remember to treat everybody with respect, and you won't get into any trouble.